Yedlin is our next presenter, and I've got his bio in the back, but I'm going to say he's very experienced, and let's welcome Mark.
Thank you very much, and my thanks to Doug for setting up a good part of what I'm going to be talking about. Actually, Doug is ahead of me in terms of where they are looking at the problems of analyzing the systems. I'm going to be showing you stuff going up front. How do we get going to implement? And we are just beginning the process now to address some of the issues that Doug has been looking at to be able to assess system performance. So let me begin by sharing with you some of the background of the problem that we're wrestling with, our proposed solution. Then I'm going to show you the visualizations that we've used to address these issues of implementing a system. And these include animations, both 2D and 3D. They include some static displays. And then I want to talk about the next steps, how we go forward, going into the realm of the things that Doug is doing. See, I'm here to share with you, but I'm also here to learn from you. So I'm looking forward to some feedback to tell me some good ideas as to how we go forward. So before we can get to that point, I have to share a little bit of background with you. I threw some of it out in 30 seconds, but now I got another 29 and a half minutes. So I'm going to fill that time, hopefully, and be informative at the same time. New York City has over 5.2 million subway riders a day. From our perspective, my problem is dealing with the 2.3 million bus trips on a daily basis. They're operating on close to 6,000 buses, over 2,800 miles of route on the 305 square miles of land area of New York City. If you were to lay out that 2,800 miles of bus routes within New York, it would stretch from here all the way back to New York. Now, some of the complicating factors that we have to deal with in addressing some of the problems of bus operations is the fact that there are multiple agencies involved. Each has their own responsibilities, jurisdiction, each has to contribute to the solution, but it's not necessarily an even trade. The public transit system, the buses are operated by New York City Transit, part of the MTA. However, the buses operate on the streets and they encounter traffic signals, the traffic signals being a major source of delay for these buses. But the streets and the signals are under the jurisdiction of the City Department of Transportation. That's a pretty standard situation in most localities. The problem is when you try to improve bus service, particularly by going into transit signal priority, which we'll talk about shortly, what happens is the transit agency gets all the benefits. They get, hopefully, improved bus service. But it's the city who has all the responsibilities to implement it since they control the signal system, and they get all the legal liabilities as well. So it's not an even partnership, yet they must work together. To give you an idea of the number of traffic signals in New York City that these buses encounter, they're more than all of the traffic signals in the city of Atlanta, Detroit, Chicago, Houston, and Los Angeles combined. There's almost 1,000 signals more in New York City than in all of those cities combined. And the number of signals in New York City continues to increase. The problem that's been experienced for bus service in New York is while they have the greatest ridership, they have the slowest speeds. My daughter takes a bus in Manhattan to go cross town to work. She can walk faster for a good part of the trip. Unfortunately, she doesn't find that funny, but I appreciate the humor since I'm not making the trip. So, the fact of the matter is that not only are the speeds slow, but they've been continuing to drop. The situation's been getting worse over time. So that gave impetus to the MTA in New York City, plus the city DOT, to start to work together to formulate solutions. And the solution is what in other places is known as bus rapid transit. In New York, it's called select bus service. The difference is that a true bus rapid transit system, by those who hold by the definition, means that you have an exclusive right-of-way for buses that is separated. New York City does not have sufficient real estate on its streets to put a dedicated bus lane with a separation. They have now been implementing exclusive bus lanes, but right turners can share those lanes. They also don't have a mechanism for exclusive left turns for these buses. That's a true BRT system. They've been going to off-board fare collection to speed up anything on the top, those three items on the top, and I apologize for the flickering here. The three on the top are improving bus travel times. The ones on the bottom just make the service more attractive. However, those who study bus rapid transit systems around the world say that the best way to increase ridership, decrease car trips in any metropolitan area, is to improve the speed of bus operations. So that is the primary objective, to improve bus speeds. Now, all of us drive cars, I presume, and I probably share a common fantasy with each of you. I would love to have a switch in my car where I could push a button and the signals would automatically turn green for me just when I need them. A continuous wave of green at the right time for me. Well, that's what the city is trying to do for all these 6,000 buses. However, their fantasy is even better than mine, because mine said I wanted a button in my car that I would push. And the city's not doing that. The city is making this happen automatically. The drivers do nothing. They do this through a very extensive wireless system that is capable of communicating with all 12, well, not yet, soon to be able to communicate with all 12,500 signals. Over the last decade, the city has not only been putting in the wireless infrastructure, but they've been putting in solid-state traffic controllers. About 9,000 of the traffic controllers have already been upgraded, meaning today a central traffic management system center in Queens can communicate to any one of the 9,000 traffic signals connected. Within the next couple of years, they will complete the system and all 12,500 will be connected. They get GPS information from the buses. That's simple. As Doug said, it's low cost. You just put in a GPS transponder. So all this infrastructure is in place. It's actually the easy part of the problem. They can communicate to all of these buses, to all of these traffic signals. The question is, what do you tell the traffic signals to do? And that's where we come in, and that's really the focus of my presentation. Because yes, they have the capability of turning this thing on, but the point is you gotta know what you're doing. Otherwise, havoc can ensue. So, the fact is, there's no infrastructure changes here, and this is very cost effective. The city did have a transit signal priority system implemented in 2006. I was involved in that implementation, but it used line of sight video or visual communication. It sent a transmission to the individual traffic signal. That's very expensive. And when you got 12,000 traffic signals, you can see that that's not going to be a viable approach. So the city is now replacing that system and has replaced it with this wireless system. So what are some of the actions that can take place? Well, if a bus is approaching the intersection and the signal is green but it's about to turn to red, the signal can be extended. The traffic management center can send a message and tell that next traffic signal, wherever it is, stay on a few extra seconds. Or if the bus is arriving and the signal is red, the system can shorten that red, meaning it's shortening the green for the cross streets, so that the bus is not delayed as long. And then there's this particular configuration, again I apologize for all this flickering, where you can build what looks like a pretty standard bus stop here at the intersection. However, the difference, actually, can any of you see what the difference is between this and a normal bus stop at the intersection? You notice something in that picture? Anyone?
It's
a queue jump. What makes it a queue jump?
Bus only.
Well, yeah, and
then it proceeds ahead of the other signal.
okay, the point is that there's an extra traffic signal. That extra traffic signal is only for the bus. That's what provides the queue jump. You can have that signal go green before the other lanes see a green signal. That gives the bus the opportunity to move out because it would have to merge. There's no through lane for that bus to move into. So it's got to cut in front of the other traffic. Without that advanced green, it would have to wait for all the traffic alongside it to clear out before it could move over and pull out. So you can see the potential for savings there. Now the city has started to implement this, and I'm going to show you the first implementation, which is actually in effect right now. We are working on a total of 7 corridors throughout the city in all 5 boroughs of New York, which will encompass approximately 330 intersections. That initial rollout is literally 1/3 of the traffic signals in the city of Atlanta. We're talking about 39 of the 2,800 miles of road that are currently being fitted for this system. Again, the hardware is there, the infrastructure is there. It's the traffic engineering that's the tricky component. And that's where we've been focusing our visualization efforts. We are on-call traffic engineers for the city of New York, and this has become a very important project for them. Some of these corridors are as long as 14 miles, the one in Staten Island. And if you look at this Google Earth image, you can see there's actually green in New York City. Staten Island looks a lot more like other places in the country than New York City. So Staten Island's pretty suburban. Lower Manhattan, of course, is very dense, and the epitome of what we think of as dense urban environment. So is the sections of Brooklyn and Queens, but not as much as Manhattan. So these corridors all have different traffic characteristics associated with them. The first corridor that we began to work on, and this one is actually operating, is in Lower Manhattan. It starts at the Staten Island Ferry Terminal at the southern tip of Manhattan, and it winds its way along Water Street, which runs parallel to the coast. That's going straight through the Wall Street Financial District, then it turns and proceeds up through the Lower East Side, actually Chinatown first, and ends in the Lower East Side. The corridor is 2.2 miles long, and there's 34 intersections. You can think of this as one of the most challenging areas to start to implement a new signal priority system. You've got a lot of pedestrians in the Wall Street area. You've got a lot of trucks loading and unloading. You have bicycles. There are bicycle lanes, and the city's got a big push on bicycles. You have what the city calls senior pedestrian zones. This corridor actually runs through areas where the senior population is sufficiently large that the city has special rules for timing the traffic signals in that portion of the corridor. They allow extra time for pedestrians to cross. That's another factor to deal with. The number of trucks and taxis and so on. So if you can think of this mass of traffic and trying to make traffic improve and particularly help buses. Why was this corridor picked even with all of these challenges? Because this is one of the most heavily utilized routes. However, it's got among the slowest speeds in the city for understandable reasons. So, here are the traffic engineering challenges that we faced, and then we'll talk about how visualization was used to look at some of these. We started with this corridor of 34 intersections. The question is, do you make the system work for all 34 of them? If not, which ones? Why and why not? Perhaps some of these intersections you will allow during some times of the day, but not others. Perhaps you will allow buses in one direction to receive priority at some of these intersections at some times of the day, and you'll allow buses in the other direction to receive priority at other times of the day. All of these questions have to be answered. The next one is once you identify an intersection, and of course you have to be able to pick intersections where you're not going to screw up the traffic, where you can actually provide benefits to the buses, as I said earlier, without killing pedestrians and without adversely affecting the cross-street traffic to the point that you get a large number of complaints. Then the question is, for each of those intersections, what phases are we adjusting, and how much time do we have to work with? The amount of time we have to work with also varies by time of day, because the signal timing planes change from the morning to the midday to the afternoon. There's also directionality that's important, because you may have two buses coming from opposite directions. And it may be that at this time of the day, the bus will reach the intersection a lot faster. It doesn't need so much of an extension in this direction as it would in that direction. All of these things have to be taken into account. Then the question is, this is a clear case of information overload. If you know the position of 6,000 buses at all times throughout the city, when do you act on that information? When should the system start to adjust the next traffic signal to help a particular bus? Which call at an intersection should the system process first? Or maybe only one of them at all. There are bends. If you looked at that map, you can see that there are actually some bends in the corridor. So you can have buses simultaneously approaching an intersection from perpendicular directions, which means they're calling for competing phases. How do you reconcile that? And then, of course, we talked about queue jumps earlier. We actually developed a manual for the city DOT for the criteria of when it's warranted to put in a queue jump. In other words, how much traffic needs to be there to make it worthwhile to do it, and how much real estate do you need to make it work. And that's been adopted as a standard citywide for implementing queue jumps. And of course, the bottom line question is, what are the effects of all of this? And gee, wouldn't it be nice to know that first? I'd love to know, is it worth it before you go and do it? Well, that we will know by answering these questions. I'd love to know that before the other questions are answered, but the point is, unless you know the answers to all the other questions, you don't know what the effects are going to be. So, these are some of the implementation questions that we had to address. And the result is that we gave actual instructions to the city, which are programmed into the traffic management center, that allow the system to work automatically during the morning, the midday, and the evening. So the traffic management center does nothing but turn the system on. We'll be talking about the monitoring, that's another story, but there's no human interaction. And the buses are moving along and the drivers aren't doing anything. In fact, we don't want them to do anything. I mentioned we did this earlier in Staten Island in 2006. The drivers went ballistic. They thought Big Brother is watching. So they did all sorts of sabotage on the equipment. They pulled it out. And it was a challenge even where to mount these line of sight emitters, because if you put them on the top of the bus where you really like them, then the MTA says, well, wait a minute, we got to wash these buses, and they're going to get ruined if you put them up there. But when you put them lower, then you have trucks in front of them, and then they don't see the signal. So now you can see the advantages of having this completely wireless system citywide. But you have to address all of these issues. Now, some of the other constraints I mentioned in my 30 seconds. You can't screw up coordination. You got to deal with the capacity. You have to deal with all the cross streets. The fact is that buses have this habit of stopping at stops to service passengers. So that's going to throw off whatever coordination we try to provide for them up front. And I mentioned the problem of pedestrians, and particularly seniors. So our objectives were to address all of these implementation questions, and to do so in such a way, again, the goal of doing this is to save the most time possible with the least adverse impacts to the cross streets in an effort to optimize ridership, increase that 2.3 million. We also wanted to be able to provide metrics, the travel time savings that bus riders can expect and what the traffic on the cross streets could expect. And an important one that may be overlooked, so I mentioned it here. Provide justification. Some of what I'm about to show you was important because the funds for this come as CMAC, Congestion Management and Air Quality Funds, from FHWA. And so they need to see that there was a viable approach and that this problem could be solved in a tractable way. And they want to continue to know that as the city wants to keep adding more and more corridors. So here's one of the visualizations we did of existing conditions. Now this is a simulation, it's not just a rendering. We had an army of observers at every one of the 34 intersections. Everything you see was counted. Every truck, every bus, every taxi, every bicycle, every pedestrian. Not only were the pedestrians counted, you can see them up there on the corner, a whole collection of them, some more on the next corner. We had to classify the pedestrians because of these senior pedestrian zones. We had to be able to distinguish the elderly from the less elderly and provide all that information to the city. So now we're coming up to the iconic Brooklyn Bridge, and the route is turning now from Water Street onto Madison Street, and it's going towards the Manhattan Bridge. It's going to go underneath the Manhattan Bridge and then make a left turn. So we've just left the financial district and we're coming into Chinatown. You'll see that in a moment with the Chinese writing on the buildings off to the right. We put just enough background into this so that we could orient people who were seeing it. So this is all actual conditions. The traffic signals are as they are set by the city of New York. And this represents about 7:30 in the morning. It takes about 20 minutes for the bus to do this. We're doing it in less than 2, just flying the camera over. The simulation was done with a model by the name of Aimson by TSS. You see the bicycles over there. We did a little subliminal advertising with our GPI truck. In fact, all the trucks had GPI on them. But this was important. This was important to get buy-in. Now, we could build models that were sufficiently robust to handle all the different aspects of the environment. Now, I'm going to show you some more detailed animations where we start to look at how to make the system work. And so, in the animation I'm going to show you in a moment, I'm just cluing you into what to look for. The red bars here denote a red signal. The stop bar that's green denotes a green signal. These little spots on the screen are not dots on your glasses or on your eyes. Those are the pedestrians. And we have our bicycles looking like that. Now here's an important one you might not think is so important at first. Here's a bus at a bus stop. But when there's yellow in front of the bus, it means that the bus is at the stop and the doors are open. Why is that important? Because we built the system in such a way that when the driver opens the door, that's the only thing he does that has an effect on the system. Opening the door for the passengers kills the TSP call. It stops calling to extend the green when the bus can't use it. When the bus closes the door, the bus will move forward a little bit in the animation, and you will see that the yellow bar is behind the bus, not in front. And here is a split screen. On the top, we're following a bus heading south, and without the TSP. On the bottom, we're following the bus with the TSP. We're seeing here what's happening. The bus on the bottom is going to get an early return to green. That red signal is going to be shortened as a result of the TSP. And that bus is moving out ahead of the one on top. And we're seeing off on the right that so far we've crossed 4 intersections with TSP and saved 36 seconds. And we can follow this along, and we spent a lot of time looking at these animations in great detail in order to work out the various implementation questions. The primary one is, when do you act? How far should the bus be from the intersection before you start to adjust the signals? That's fundamental. It has to be done through simulation in order to give some intelligent information to the traffic management center. So we can follow the buses along, and there's just one more example I want to show you. We'll get there in a moment. But you can see we've already saved almost 3 minutes. It's not linear. That bounces up and down. So if you watch this often enough, you know when to get on and off the bus to save the most time. We're about to come to a classic case. There's a bus at a bus stop. And The yellow bar's in front, the doors are open, the bus is servicing passengers. Notice what happens, the signal is green now. But the bus can't go because the doors are still open, it's still servicing passengers. That's a classic condition. Does happen. And so what happens here is also classic. The bus finished servicing the passengers, and now the signal's red. But the TSP kicks in, you get an early return to green, and that bus does get some benefit from the system. So that's really what I wanted to show you. If I let this run to the end, you'll see that that 2 minutes goes up to about 3 minutes and 14 seconds. It actually gets over 4 minutes, and then it loses some later on. Because there are trucks that are unloading that the bus encounters, it creates some queues. The TSP tries to help there, but there's congestion because traffic is moving out of the lane in front of the bus and so on. But by watching these very carefully, this had a very important effect on our ability to be able to answer the implementation questions for the city. So, this was not a rigged example. The example I'm showing you was deliberately picked because this turns out to be about the typical situation we expect. Interesting for us is that the TSP in this particular case doesn't have to do a lot of work. There's 24 intersections out of the 34 that we recommended for buses in the morning in that direction. But the TSP only has to do something at 8 of them. 1 out of 3. The other thing we learned is that whereas I projected my fantasy as the signal always turning green for me just when I need it, that's not at all what's happening. Because the buses are stopping at bus stops, and because we try to give them a good coordination pattern to begin with, which we did, we changed all of the signal timings before we put the TSP in. Most of the TSP actions are early return to green. They're happening while the signal is red. They're not extending the green. Anybody know why? It's really actually simple probability when you think about it. I had to think about it because I wasn't anticipating the result. But when I saw it and I thought about it, it's probability. Why? Because you extend the green when the bus is arriving just near the end of the green. If the bus can get in at the start of the green and move clear through, you don't have to do anything. And it doesn't. The system doesn't. So there's a lot more time that the signal is red where the bus needs help than there is end of green time. So by that probability, it's really, in this case, maybe 1/4 of the actions, 1/3 of the actions are green extensions. So this is what we gave to the city. We gave them all these tables saying, here's in this direction in the morning, this is what you extend, this is the phase you truncate, this is how much time you have to work with, and that's the most important one on the right, is where the bus needs to be from the intersection before you start to adjust the signal. We did some other types of displays. These are displays showing one of the objectives, of course, is not only to save time, but to save variability in travel time for buses. So you can see that through the distributions, that not only did the mean shift off to the left to lower travel time, but the variability narrowed as well. If I had this chart, I would have showed this for my 30-second presentation, because this chart is used to be able to demonstrate to the public the whole thing, everything I told you up to now, in one chart. It shows the buses moving along the route. It shows selected times where the bus is, how much time it's saved at various points along the route, and exactly what the system did at various points. And what we're seeing is savings, maximum savings of about 14.2%, which if you head into the Staten Island Ferry Terminal, that means something. You can get up to 3 minutes in savings on a 20-minute run. That's beneficial. So, the system's running. It was put into place in the middle of June. We're working on an after study right now, in which, as shown here, we're out in the field, we're looking at the signals, we're looking at the buses, so we're taking visual observations of what's going on, and we're getting all sorts of logs out of the system, telling us when the bus called for service, what's the signal doing. So we're doing 2 different levels of analysis, and we're currently working on the other 6 corridors. Our next steps are to try to improve the animation display, we want to be able to come up with some additional displays because the city now realizes we have 7 corridors that are coming online. We want to be able to manage those corridors. First thing is to know that the system is working. It's complicated. Why? Because these emitters are on the buses. The MTA is responsible for that. The MTA is responsible for identifying the locations of the buses and telling the city where the bus is. So you've got one agency dealing with that end. You've got the city dealing with the signals. There's lots of room for errors. So we want to be able to confirm that under a basic level that the system's doing what it's supposed to do. So what we want to do is provide visualizations of what the simulator says you're supposed to have happen versus the city telling us from its management center what's actually happening. Be able to look at them side by side and see what's going on, to verify the operations and then to assess the impacts, going into more sophisticated displays as Doug described. So in the realm of an enhanced animation, here's a part of the corridor at Delancey Street and Allen Street. This is done with 3D Studio. However, we're using the AIMSUN simulator, not VISM. Most people use VISM. City of New York picked AIMSUN for a variety of reasons. And so not much work has been done at all in trying to get AIMSUN to talk to 3D Studio. So whereas this might have been much simpler with VISM, it's much more challenging with AIMSUN. We have the 3D Studio Max people working to help us right now on technical issues. We have TSS, the developer of AIMSUN, helping us to come up with better traffic movements. There are some issues in communicating between AIMSUN and 3D Studio Max. But we think that this will be helpful in convincing FHWA for the additional corridors we want to look at beyond the 7. And finally, just to wrap up quickly, we're talking about some kind of map displays so that we could provide very simple information, like a heat map, to say, here's what the system is doing. Look at various intersections, be able to say, okay, the most TSP activities happening at the intersections in red, how many extensions, how many truncations, how much time is being taken. Those are good survey information that if you can look at a screen like that and see what's happening. We want to produce this from the simulator and have the city produce it from the live system and see how it lines up. Another last one of the displays is to be able to look at the percentages of time. The 2 left columns are inputs. We know what the normal cycle is. We know what we're saying our maximum TSP parameters are. But on the right, we want to know when the system's working, what's happening on average, because people complain. The naysayers say, you're taking too much time from the cross street. We want to be able to demonstrate exactly what we're doing. So, to sum it all up, because I'm quite aware that I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch. So, the animations were very, very beneficial to look at the time of day variations, to pick the intersections, to pick the directions. Here I'm showing a shot of buses, one going in one direction, the other in the other direction. Do you help both of them at the next intersection? The animations told us when we could do that and when we were going to screw up the coordination. So that was important. Understanding the maximum extensions, that's a critical variable. When to act is a critical variable. And so again, to be able to justify funding and to verify operations. These are all the benefits of what we've done so far. And I welcome any questions and certainly any feedback as to where we should be going in new displays for the Traffic Management Center. And with that, I thank you.
What's the improvement in average speed for this particular route?
Okay.
You put one.
Right, I had the travel time, so now I have to think about what the speed improvements are. Off the top of my head, the number's not coming to me, so I will get back to you if you give me the card. I focused on the travel time and not the speed. There were, of course, savings of probably on the order of a mile or so per hour. These buses are going very slow to begin with. So a mile constitutes a rather substantial percentage. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris from San Francisco MTA. I'm blessed to be able to work in an agency with the DOT and the agency in the same house. I wanted to ask you about your experience in terms of being more aggressive with TSP versus not. Could you talk a little bit more about your discussions of what you had to face with maybe pedestrian advocates or side street advocates, if you will, not wanting time taken away for transit? given you have 2.3 million bus riders?
Yes. The fact of the matter is the prime directive, if you will, was not to kill pedestrians. So we had to, number one, ensure that we were not going to take away time beyond the minimum crossing requirements for pedestrians, be they regular pedestrians or seniors. So that was a major factor. That was a given off the bat. Then the question was, how much time do you have left to be able to work with after that? So we threw out a lot of the intersections just because we needed time for pedestrians. We didn't have extra time. So that was one of the major factors. The city DOT has put this online. They're first going to start to get the feedback from any advocacy groups who start to complain. But the fact is, what we did, which I think worked out well, knowing that we were going to steal time from the cross streets, the secret was we retimed all the signals and started off giving the cross streets more time than they had before. Knowing that whenever the bus needs that time, we'd steal it back. So, we actually had enough time at those intersections where we could make this work so that there shouldn't be much complaints on the cross streets. And in fact, it was a win-win. Yes?
Well, we'll also let you know that lunch has begun. So if you would like to get up and leave now, you're welcome to, but I'm sure that Mark will continue to ask questions, so answer questions.
Reverse direction traffic, did you study any of the, what happened with that, when you're favoring southbound or something, what's happening with the northbound?
We did that through the simulation. We did repeated simulation runs to fine-tune it. Because as you see, the instructions we came up with were intersection by intersection, intersection by direction by time of day. So we actually had to look very carefully at those animations to decide what we were going to do in terms of competing buses. And yes, in some directions they get it in the morning, in other directions they get it in the afternoon. And sometimes a day, some intersections get it in both directions. Yes, I believe you had your hand up.
Yes, no problem. I had a question. Maybe it wouldn't be relevant given the traffic composition in Manhattan. But what do you see in general as there's a challenge between schedule adherence and TSP? So, for example, if the bus keeps going faster than expected, people let us assume it's not Manhattan or some other place. What does that do to the passenger in terms of their expectation as to when they should be on site?
Okay, that is something that could certainly be built into an analysis like what we did. The point is that the vast majority of bus riders in Manhattan would be thrilled if their bus had any semblance of schedule adherence. So hopefully the system will now create a new problem, and that will be what we call a happy problem that can be addressed. Yes.
It seems like there is a collateral benefit for the vehicles that are going the same direction as the buses.
Absolutely, yes.
And I assume that's a major route that you're going. Have you done any performance measure that how you're helping the vehicles that are going the same
Yes.
direction and
Yes.
compare it with the opposite direction that creates more delay for them?
The more delay, theoretically, is for the cross streets. Traffic in both directions on the main street get a green simultaneously. So if you're helping traffic in this direction, you're also helping traffic in that direction. The concern is what are you doing to the cross street? And as I say, the way we addressed that was by giving as much time up front to the cross street so that we could steal it back and that they wouldn't perceive that they were losing time. Yes?
I'm just wondering if on the network, Manhattan's probably really complicated with lots of parallel corridors which doesn't have the transit buses. How much of that did you actually have to get therefore to simulate for the feeding traffic into the main corridor you are analyzing?
We looked back at the adjacent intersections off the car in order to get appropriate traffic into the system to measure those effects. We also spent a lot of time, in fact my crew is out there now, riding buses for some of these corridors. spent a lot of time in the field. You can imagine the army of people that was out there to collect all that data just all over Manhattan. The same effort is going on for the other 6 corridors as we speak. Any other questions? Yes?
I think I got that your wireless system is in addition to the Opticon, which is just for the.
That's being replaced.
Yeah.
Opticon has gone out the window.
So this is totally separate.
Totally separate.
So I got that.
One of the corridors we're working on in Staten Island was the same one we worked on in 2006. They're pulling out the Opticon, we're putting in the wireless. The original was 14 intersections, we're adding another 20 with the wireless.
The part I didn't get was